History, which is essentially the history of spirit, runs its course in time. Thus, the development of history falls into time. But Hegel is not satisfied with establishing the within-timeness of spirit as a fact. Rather, he attempts to understand how it is possible for spirit to fall into time, which is the completely abstract. The time must be able to receive spirit, as it were. And spirit must in turn be related to time and its essence. Thus we must discuss two things. 1. How does Hegel define the essence of time? 2. What belongs to the essence of spirit that makes it possible for it to fall into time? Our answer to these two questions will serve merely to elucidate our interpretation of Dasein as temporality, and to do so by way of a comparison. We shall make no claim to give even a relatively complete treatment of the allied problems in Hegel, especially since we have no intention of criticizing Hegel. Because Hegel's concept of time presents the most radical way in which the vulgar understanding of time has been given form conceptually, and one that has received too little attention, the contrast of this concept with the idea of temporality that we have expounded is one that especially suggests itself. Hegel's concept of time, the systematic place in which a philosophical interpretation of time is carried out, can serve as a criterion for understanding the basic guideline which leads the fundamental conception of time. The first traditional, thematically detailed interpretation of the vulgar understanding of time is to be found in Aristotle's physics, in the context of an ontology of nature. Time is connected with location and motion. True to the tradition, Hegel's analysis of time has its place in the second part of his Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences bearing the title, The Philosophy of Nature. The first division treats mechanics. Its first section is dedicated to a discussion of space and time. They are the abstract outside of one another. 19. Although Hegel puts space and time together, this does not amount simply to juxtaposing them externally, space, and also time. Philosophy fights against this also. The transition from space to time does not mean that they are treated in adjoining paragraphs, but space itself goes over. Space is time, that is, time is the truth of according to Hegel. If space is thought dialectically in what it is, this being of space reveals itself as time. How must space be thought? Space is the unmediated indifference of nature's being outside itself. 21. That means that space is the abstract multiplicity of the points distinguishable in it. Space is not interrupted by these points, but neither does it first arise from them by way of joining them together. Space remains in its turn undifferentiated, differentiated by the differentiable points that are themselves space. The differentiations themselves have the nature of what they differentiate. Nevertheless, the point is a negation of space in that it differentiates something in space, though in such a way that it itself remains in space as this negation. The point is, after all, space. The point does not lift itself out of space as something other than space. Space is the undifferentiated outsidion another of the multiplicity of points. But space is not a point, it is rather, as Hegel says, punctuality. 22. This is the basis of the statement in which Hegel thinks space in its truth, that is, as time. Negativity, which related itself as point to space, and in which it develops its determinations as line and plane, is, however, in the sphere of self-externality offers it seen equally for itself and its determinations. But at the same time, as positing in the sphere of self-externality, it appears as indifferent to that which is quietly side by side. Thus posited for itself, it is if space is represented, that is, immediately intuited unmittelbar angeschaut in the indifferent subsistence of its distinctions. The negations are, so to speak, simply given. But this representing does not yet grasp space in its being. That is possible only in thought as the synthesis that goes through thesis and antithesis, and sublates them. Space is thought and thus grasped in its being only if the negations do not simply subsist in their indifference, but are sublated, that is, themselves negated. In the negation of negation, that is, punctuality, the point posits itself for itself and thus emerges from the indifference of subsistence. Posited for itself, it distinguishes itself from this or that point. It is no longer this one and not yet that one. In positing itself for itself, it posits the succession in which it stands, the sphere of being outside of itself Auflösung that is now the negated negation. The sublation of punctuality as indifference signifies that it can no longer lie quietly in the paralyzed stillness of space. The point rebels against all the other points. According to Hegel, this negation of negation as punctuality is time. If this discussion has any demonstrable meaning at all, it can mean nothing other than that the positing of itself for itself of each point is a now here, and so on. Every point is posited for itself as a now point. Thus the point has actuality in time. That through which the point can posit itself for itself, always as this point, is always a now. The condition of the possibility of the point's positing itself for itself is the now. This condition of possibility constitutes the being of the point, and being is at the same time having been thought Jettechthite. Thus, since the pure thinking of punctuality, that is, of space, always thinks the now and the being outside itself of the now, space is time. How is time itself defined? As the negative unity of being outside itself, time is similarly something absolutely abstract and ideal. It is the being that in being is not, and in not being is, it is intuited becoming. This means that the absolutely momentary distinctions that immediately sublate themselves are determined as external, but external to themselves. 24 Time reveals itself for this interpretation as intuited becoming. According to Hegel, this signifies a transition from being to nothingness, or from nothingness to being. 25 Becoming is coming into being as well as passing away. Being or non-being goes over. What does this mean with regard to time? The being of time is the now. But since every now either now is no longer, or now is not yet, it can also be grasped as non-being. Time is intuited becoming, that is, the transition that is not thought but simply presents itself in the succession of now. If the essence of time is determined as intuited becoming, this reveals the fact that time is understood primarily in terms of the now, in the way that such a now can be found by sheer intuition. We do not need any complicated discussion to make it clear that, in his interpretation of time, Hegel is wholly moving in the direction of the vulgar understanding of time. Hegel's characterization of time, in terms of the now, presupposes that the now remains covered over and leveled down in its full structure, so that it can be intuited angeschaut as something present, even if it is present only ideally. The fact that Hegel interprets time in terms of this primary orientation toward the now that has been leveled down is proved by the following statements. The now is enormously privileged. It is nothing but the individual now, but this now that is so proudly exclusive is dissolved, diffused and turned to dust by my expressing it. 26 Moreover, in nature where time is now, no stable difference between those dimensions past and future ever comes about. 27 In the positive sense of time, one can thus say that only the present is, the before and after are not, but the concrete present is the result of the past and pregnant with the future. Thus the true present is eternity. 28 If Hegel calls time intuited becoming, angeschaut werden, neither coming into being nor passing away has priority in it. Nevertheless, on occasion he characterizes time as the abstraction of consuming, and thus formulates the vulgar experience and interpretation of time in the most radical way. 29 On the other hand, when Hegel really defines time, he is consistent enough to grant no such priority to consuming and passing away as that to which the everyday experience of time rightly adheres. For Hegel can no more provide dialectical grounds for this priority than for the circumstance that he introduces as self-evident, that precisely when the point posits itself for itself, the now turns up. So even when he characterizes time as becoming, Hegel understands this becoming in an abstract sense that goes beyond the representation of the flux of time. The most appropriate expression for Hegel's conception of time thus lies in the determination of time as the negation of negation, that is, of punctuality. Here the succession of nows is formalized in the most extreme sense and leveled down to an unprecedented degree. 30. It is only in terms of this formal and dialectical concept of time that Hegel can produce a connection between time and spirit. b. Hegel's interpretation of the connection between time and spirit. In what way has spirit itself been understood such that Hegel can say it is in accordance with spirit, that it is actualized to fall into time, with time defined as the negation of a negation? The essence of spirit is the concept. By this Hegel understands not the universal that is intuited in a genus as the form of what is thought, but the form of the thinking that thinks itself, conceiving of oneself as grasping of the non-I. Since grasping the non-I presents a differentiation, there lies in the pure concept, as the grasping of this differentiation, a differentiation of the difference. Thus Hegel can define the essence of spirit formally and epiphantically as the negation of a negation. This absolute negativity gives a logically formalized interpretation of Descartes' cogito me cogitare rein, in which he sees the essence of conscientia. Accordingly, the concept is the self-conceiving conception of the self. As this, the self is authentic, that is, the I is the pure concept itself that has come to existence as the, but the I is this first pure unity relating itself to itself, not directly, but rather in abstracting from all determinateness and content and going back to the freedom of the limitless identity with itself. 32. Thus the I is universality, but it is individuality just as immediate. This negating of negation is both the absolute unrest of spirit and also its self-revelation, which belongs to its essence. The progression of spirit actualizing itself in history contains a principle of exclusion. 33. However, in this exclusion what is excluded does not get detached from the spirit, it gets surmounted, making itself free in overcoming, and at the same time supporting, characterizes the freedom of spirit. Thus progress never means a quantitative more, but is essentially qualitative, and indeed has the quality of spirit. Progression is known and knowing itself in its goal. In every step of its progress, spirit has to overcome itself, as the truly inimical hindrance of its aim. 34. The goal of the development of spirit is to attain its own concept. 35. The development of itself is a hard, infinite struggle against itself. Since the restlessness of the development of spirit bringing itself to its concept is the negation of a negation, it is in accord with its self-actualization to fall into time as the immediate negation of a negation. For time is the concept itself that is there, and represents itself to consciousness as empty intuition. For this reason spirit necessarily appears in time, and it appears in time so long as it has not grasped its pure concept, that is, has not annulled time. Time is the pure self that is externally intuited and not grasped by the self, the concept merely intuited. 37. Thus spirit, in accordance with its essence, necessarily appears in time. Thus world history in general is the interpretation of spirit in time, just as the idea interprets itself in nature as space. 38. The excluding, that belongs to the movement of development, contains a relation to non-being. That is time, understood in terms of the self-insistent sich aufpresenden of the now. Time is abstract negativity. As intuited becoming, it is the differentiated self-differentiation that is directly to be found, the concept that is there, that is, present vorhanden. As something present and thus external to spirit, time has no power over the concept, but the concept is rather the power of time. Hegel shows the possibility of the historical actualization of spirit, in time, by going back to the sameness of the formal structure of spirit and time as the negation of a negation. The most empty, formal ontological and formal epiphanical abstraction, into which spirit and time are externalized, makes possible the production of a kinship of the two. But since, at the same time, time is yet conceived in the sense of world time that has been absolutely leveled down, so that its provenance thus remains completely covered over, it simply confronts spirit as something present vorhanden. For this reason spirit must first fall into time. It remains obscure what indeed is signified ontologically by this falling, and the actualization of spirit that has power over time and really exists outside of it. Just as Hegel throws little light on the origin of time that has been leveled down, he leaves totally unexamined the question of whether the essential constitution of spirit as the negating of negation is possible at all in any other way than on the basis of primordial temporality. Whether Hegel's interpretation of time and spirit and their connection is correct and has an ontologically primordial basis at all cannot be discussed now. However, that the formal and dialectical construction of the connection of spirit and time can be ventured at all reveals the primordial kinship of both. Hegel's construction was prompted by his arduous struggle to conceive the concretion of spirit. Following statement from the concluding chapter of his Phenomenology of Spirit makes that known. Thus time appears as the very fate and necessity of spirit when it is not in itself complete, the necessity of its giving self-consciousness a richer share in consciousness, of setting in motion the immediacy of the in itself, the form in which substance is in consciousness, or conversely, of its realizing and revealing the in itself taken as what is inward, and this is what is first inward, that is, vindicating it for the certainty of our existential analytic of Dasein, on the other hand, begins with the concretion of factically thrown existence itself in order to reveal temporality as what makes such existence primordially possible. Spirit does not first fall into time, but exists as the primordial temporalizing of temporality. Temporality temporalizes world-time, in whose horizon history can appear as an occurrence within time. Spirit does not fall into time, but factical existence falls, in falling prey, out of primordial authentic temporality. This falling, however, itself has its existential possibility in a mode of temporalizing that belongs to temporality.